Welcome to On the Brink, a fresh lens to take you and your business to new heights. This is On the Brink with Andi Simon, a podcast to help you get off the brink. Remember, my job is to help you see, feel, and think in new ways. And that's the only way you're going to find ideas that you can now embrace, test, try, and in some way figure out how to adapt to these fast changing times. I find very interesting and wonderful people. My guests are really a joy to share with you because they bring perspectives that expand our own and give us some ideas that we can work with. Remember the quote, if I can't see it, I can't be it. So today, I'm delighted to have John Fisher here from the Lake District of England. Thank you, John, for joining me.
Thank you very much, Andi, for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
John and I have kindred spirits. We both like to work with helping people change. That's his change curve behind him that we'll talk about. But this is a very interesting conversation for my audience, whether you're viewing it or listening to it, because our audience is here to learn how to see things in a new way, begin to understand how to change their behaviors and their feelings so they can adapt to fast changing times. Let me tell you a little bit about John, and then I'll let him tell you about his own journey. He's an experienced management development and soft skills trainer. The word soft skills is always an interesting thought for me. Hard skills, soft skills, what are my skills? How do I, without the soft skills, you can't have any skills. He's a trainer, a coach, a facilitator, and a counselor. He's a chartered psychologist working with businesses, both individuals and teams. And as I read about his background, while he's been doing this a long time, his approach keeps evolving. His approach is based on helping you maximize your personal understanding and identify what you can do to improve your personal performance in a relaxed, friendly, and safe way. Think about it. Change is painful. Your brain hates it. It hates me. It hates John. But you're here because you know I need to begin to improve, whether it's AI or new technologies or new boss or new generations or a new fill in the blank. They are coming fast. They always have, but now we really know about them. He operates from a personal construct perspective, meaning much of his work is based on understanding the meaning individuals apply to things from within their own map of the world and how this can help or hinder them. Now, remember, if I said this once, I've said it so many times, humans are meaning makers. I don't know whether it was 40,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, we created this amazing transformation in our brain where we can assign things meaning. So a rock can have many meanings. A cross can have many meanings. A crossroads can have many meanings. And what we interpret as the right meaning is very personal to our own story. And that's why today is so interesting, because if you can begin to understand that, when the things holding you back are well within your own, your grip. And as I tell my own coaching clients, if you want to change, you own your mind map. And now it's your turn to tell a new story. How do you do that? Think about it. It's a new story for you. John, thank you for joining me. And please share with our listeners, who is John Fisher? And this is so much fun. Bringing you from England is a treat. Who are you?
Thank you. I wonder that a lot, Andi. A lot of mornings I wake up thinking, who am I? What am I doing? You triggered something there with that summary, and it's always fascinating hearing somebody else talking and summarizing. But I have a quote, and I love quotes, that I use in training a lot, with a picture of Humpty Dumpty sitting on the wall. And Humpty Dumpty saying, when I use a word, it means exactly what I intend it to mean, nothing more, nothing less. And I think that sums up part of my approach. And another quote I love is, I think, from Lao Tzu: mastery of other people is strength. Mastery of yourself is true power. And those sort of concepts really drive everything I do, and really influence who I am. And that sort of concept, that I know I've been a different person in different situations with different people, And I know I've been a different person in the same situation with the same people. And so it's about understanding that for me. And my life journey has been an interesting one, and I love stories as well. In that I came from a small village in the Yorkshire Dales, um, from a working class family, working class background, but with one ambition as a child to join the Air Force. And at 16, I joined the Air Force, left school with a couple of qualifications, joined the Air Force working on aircraft radar systems, radio systems, and aircraft simulators. And very quickly learned I wasn't cut out to be an engineer, poster boy for the imposter syndrome, and lived that experience of being a really square peg in a really small round hole. The problem was I was a big square peg, um, and just didn't fit comfortably. And so did in the UK, we have a commercial university that's in the air called the Open University that some of your listeners, I'm sure, will be familiar with. And I transited while still working originally on aircraft simulators, and did a psychology first degree, and came across somebody called George Kelly, amongst other people, who, as soon as I started reading him, I realized that George Kelly wrote my life. It talked about that understanding of the self. We're all unique individuals. We all react to situations, really based on our past experiences. So maybe one way of bringing that to life is your listeners will listen to this based on your other podcasts and expect to get something that follows to a greater or lesser extent your other podcasts. And this will either confirm or deny that supposition that then alters the next time they listen to the podcast again and they've got a slightly different anticipation. And that led me through project management into counselling originally in the helping people sense rather than the legal sense, and led to 7 years in project management and then an internal consultant helping the organisation I work for change and deploying a massive internal change that was fascinating. And that watching the change and living my experience of not being a comfortable fit in something and having a total mid-career change in my 30s led to part of the change behind me that we can talk about in a bit more detail later, but lived through that experience of observing how and why people did and didn't change, the implications and the impact. And that effectively led to becoming a training partner, to becoming, I then did a master's in organizational psychology, um, that effectively led to me where I am today, doing that with some multinational companies, as well as some one-person companies, family-owned businesses, and one-to-one organizations. So that's my story, from being a square peg in a round hole to not working a day for the last 20 years and loving every interaction.
You know, John, you and I have so much in common because people keep asking me when I'm going to retire. And I say, well, I did about 30 years ago. If retirement is doing what you love to do, and I'm not quite sure what I would do if I wasn't doing what I'm doing, other than
You and me
play
both,
every day,
Andy.
right? But come back to your a couple of things that piqued my interest as you were talking. I'm an anthropologist, and I have positioned myself for 22 years now as a corporate anthropologist that helps companies change. Your experience of being inside an organization and watching it try and go through the changes really was transformative both for you and for them.
Mm.
Any observations that you can share about the pain of change. Remember, the brain hates it, and people don't know how do I do that, and they're afraid of trying new things. And I have a hunch that was the origin of your change process behind you. Give us some sort of personal memories of it, if you could,
Mm.
so that the process you've created is reflected in what you learned and you saw. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, Andy, yes. And it is quite strongly steeped in. So the change curve originated when I was a volunteer counsellor for an alcohol abuse agency. And a lot of people would come for the first counselling session, have a really good session, sign up to come the following week and not turn up. And this was just across the organisation. And I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about the theory of second no-show. So I like to label things, it makes it easier to think about them. And I then started thinking about, as an alcohol abuse counsellor, people have to change their whole life cycle if they want to do so. They've got to change their friends, their environment, how they respond and react. And I started thinking about that impact on people. And it struck me that people went away on a high, the cold light of day the next day, and the realization set in about the impact and the implications for them and the implication for their sense of self and their identity. And that gave birth to the curve. So it's about our journey and the implications for us as a person and our identity as we move through the curve. I added a few bits onto, took the basic curve concept from Kubler-Ross because it's a superb concept. And I realized that every change involves a loss of some shape, a gains as well, usually, but every change involves a loss. So the idea of the shape just fitted in that concept. And then I started looking at, rather than the perspective that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross put on, I started looking at what does that mean for me, and then started talking about the implications and going down the, let's go the other way, going down the downward curve that we've got there is about the impact and the size of the sense of that change on people. And one of the things I found is that the applications are almost limitless on this new job. Coming today to sit and to be interviewed or grilled by you as part of this process, they all start these curves going on, because every day is same but different, and that whole concept. So that's where the curve came from. And my master's dissertation was basically on a major change. I was working for a company that outsourced its whole HR department into a new joint venture company that they set up with an asset management person. So I interviewed people who were going and staying, because a few of the HR stayed in the parent company, but 90% of us were TUPE'd into another company. TUPE is trade union protection, and gives some guarantees on security when you are forced out of one company into another in the UK. And I then went back a year later and interviewed the same people, and then mapped the responses at both times. And I used George Kelly's concept of the repertory grid, which a lot of your listeners may be familiar with either through psychology or as an MBA research question type process. And I looked at ideal HR, the new organisation a year in the future, as well as HR in the past, how they felt ideal then. And one of the things that came out was that people had been sold such a great change that they anticipated ideal HR and HR in the future as being almost identical. It was about a 0.995 overlap between the two constructs. So really strong sales. I think what we all missed was we were then in a service provision organisation that makes its money from de-skilling the jobs, and it adopted the Maidster model of subject matter experts and the core generic face of the organisation. So when I went back a year later, where it wasn't ideal, people had left the organisation who'd come in as HR professionals because they ended up doing admin roles rather than HR roles. And people still interestingly perceived ideal HR and HR in a year, or me in a year, as being a big overlap, and about 0.8 overlap this time around. I also looked at the past HR a year ago, and what people did was they moved the starting point backwards to say, we've come a long way, but we started further back than we thought. And I found that fascinating as the implications of doing any change. In if you can sell the change well, people will give you more leeway because they still see a really bright future, because they think they've travelled further than they thought they were at, and the starting point moves back. And I noticed a big difference between the parent company HR, who really resented the new company, even though they had to work with them, because the parent company did nothing at all with the people who were staying. And it was almost a survivor's guilt. And because they saw those of us who were moving, getting a lot of care attention, a lot of teamwork, a lot of managing the future, and creating that really vivid future, that they resented it because they felt abandoned, they felt left out, they'd lost their friends because we all moved to a different building 5 or 10 miles away, which in the UK is a long way. I appreciate over in the US, 10 miles is the next street, but here it's a long way away. So that sort of influenced another little model I came up with as a past, present, and future timeline that basically says for the change to be effective, you've got to close the past, you've got to kill it off, you've got to though celebrate successes from the past and recognize achievements, but then close it down and give the argument for change. You've then got to create a really vibrant future picture of what's going to happen, what it's going to be like in the future, how it's going to be, so people know what they're doing, who they're doing it with, where they're doing it, and all of those good things. And then you've got to create a route map to help them get from where they are now to where they should be as part of that change. And if you don't do all three of those, you end up with people around the water coolers complaining about the past and complain about how good things used to be and how things worked, which just underneath, I always get the wrong hands on this, just underneath my shoulder here, here.
Yeah. My little
No
person
ideas.
here.
I've got that hostility, which is a Kelleyan concept of fighting hard to prove people are stupid for making you change when there was nothing wrong with the past. So a lot of energy involved in proving them idiots, as it were, because you know the past was good. So you've got to close it, but still celebrate. If you don't create that vibrant future, people will feel they're a little bit like a hamster on a treadmill and not know when change is going to stop. When can we stop? When do we keep on? This is never ending. And if you don't give them the route map, you end up with people running everywhere, going off in all directions, doing what they want. And in some of the training and the teamwork I do, have a lovely little exercise that for me brings this to life. I get everybody to close their eyes and point east. And then when they've all pointed east, I get them to open their eyes and look at where everybody else is pointing. And of course, they're all pointing all over the place. And I use that as an example of we haven't got the route map right.
Yeah.
Um, and
John, a couple of things to just set a context for what you're saying, because I was working with a client last week, and we were talking about changing the culture. And culture isn't um, a pretty thing or how you dress, it's the essence of who you are. And once you adopt it, better or worse, it becomes a part of you. It's hard to shed it. And I often have a funeral, which is what you're talking about, where
mm,
we recognize, like in a funeral, we memorialize what was so good in the past,
mm,
and we end it, because if we don't, it never goes away. It remains part of the beauty of what was. And if you don't then have, humans are futurists. We want to know where we're going.
mm,
If we don't know
mm,
where we're going, we can't live today.
mm.
And so we become immobilized because the future is cloudy, the past is gone, and we don't have any plan of any day. It becomes most anxiety producing
Yeah,
unnecessarily. Because if we can visualize where we're going, and then we can backward plan it, we can begin to understand and celebrate the small wins getting there. We know that maybe it's a destination that we will expand beyond, but at least there's a human based roadmap.
yeah.
Literally, you're right. I need a Google map that's going to take me from where I am to where I'm going. And
Mm,
the past is the past, but let's
yeah,
let's futuralize it, memorialize it, don't disrespect it, because you didn't get here without a good foundation. And now you want me to give up what I know works, even if it isn't the perfect, to go to something that I have no idea if it's going to work. And
yeah.
that creates anxiety. So this is really interesting. If you can move left or right and walk us through your little map behind you, can you do that on Zoom?
I
Maybe.
can, yes, move a little bit. I think one thing just to pick up maybe two there from what you were just saying, Andy, I love the concept of a funeral, I've got to say, and with your permission, I'll nick that as well in the future. I
Absolutely.
might, just because of the way my brain works, which is illogically and peculiarly, the Irish concept of the wake, that's a
Mm,
celebration.
yes.
And one of the things that's happening at a lot of our sporting events is um, when they have a remembrance of somebody who sadly passed, it always used to be a minute's silence at
Yes.
the event. One of the things that's become more popular over the last decade or so is a minute's applause. And I love that concept of the
Yes.
celebration. And I think for me to
Mm,
work in my world, it would be a wake. And let's have a wake for the past that then allows us to look to the future as a natural, a stepping stone. And how do we replicate within there? And I learned very early on in my internal consultancy days that you have to set context. And for me, context is fundamental
mhm.
as a result. And the organization that I was in at the time had gone through a lot of small changes and mini changes and had ended up where I'm the latest change agent that's going in talking about our change.
The latest
And
one.
lots of, oh, yeah, and it was, a lot of the blue collar workers were saying, we've been here before. Why is this different to that 10 years ago? Why is this different to that 6 years? And I ended up creating a jigsaw with the puzzle, the pieces all fitting into it on PowerPoint that had the names of all the previous changes on there that I then fitted in, and I then superimposed the change I was managing on top and basically said we couldn't have got here without all of those stepping stones that helped
Great
us to get
point.
where we are now. So they were fundamentally our journey, and I love the journey concept
Yes.
as well,
But you
on
know,
there that helped, and it helped a lot.
well, but that's a brilliant idea because um, that we don't really know how we got here. And until you
Mm,
concretize it, in my Anthro 101 class, I remember so well, the professor said, remember, out of context, data has no meaning.
mm,
And so your context point is worth emphasizing because your folks resisting the next one. I mean, we all can have stories like that. I had my own, where the minute you walk in, they're ready to shoot you. You can feel the spears heading your way. Oh, another change agent.
yeah,
One of the things that I'm trying to work through is how do you help people make change their friend?
yeah,
As we're listening and we're talking, I'm saying to myself, I bet John has some insight into how do I turn pain into pleasure? Because the brain goes after pleasure, even if it's painful. And it lives a story that's there. It becomes the way we do things.
yeah.
I can make change a pleasurable experience for you where you master it and you feel competent at it, like hitting a golf ball. Can I turn around your mind from resisting to embracing and encouraging? Your thoughts?
Mm, yeah. And I think that's fundamental, and I think that's how we get from compliance to commitment. And
Mhm.
one of those ways is engagement. Listen to the people, engage them, involve them,
Yes.
get them part of that process from day one. Let them speak. You might not do what they want, but give them the place to talk. Let them get it off their chest in inverted commas, and then engage them in the solution. And I'm a big fan of a couple of things. Solution focus. I'm a big fan of, which I define as, I'm not interested how I got here. What interests me is how do I get from here to where I should be,
Yes.
and that movement, engage them in them, get them to own that journey. So how could we make it work? What could we do? And Tad James's timeline therapy, I use that a lot, both in one-to-one coaching and when I've used the curve, in getting people to visualize the other side of the curve and getting them to move towards it and work towards it. So it helps them create their own future.
Yep.
And what the curve's about is, yeah, it's about that impact. So initially, you've got that, what's going to happen? There's change coming. How will I cope with that change? What will the impact of it be?
Yep.
You then got, thank God it's now here. At last, we can start moving forwards. Will this be good, bad, or indifferent? And when I'm doing this in workshops, I look at a 4 box model, a Boston box, around this change is going to be good or bad for me on one of the axes. And the other one is I've been here before, yes or no, on the other axes, that you can then plot where people are and their perception towards that change. So you can then still start managing that change. And that's where we start then coming down the curve. Or there's a little road off, which probably this way is the best to move there. We've got the road off there with that denial and the head in the sand, and I'm just going to carry on and do nothing.
I
And
love it.
that a
I love the
little
little
bit,
guy behind you that says, "This isn't for me. I'm out of
the
here."
smarties.
I see
Yeah.
myself in the future. Well, your point is extremely important. Remember, the podcast is called On the Brink, how to get you off the brink. And
Mm,
and 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 this can be in personal life or in a professional life, but the same human processes are essential. If you don't see where you're going, you can't get,
yeah.
and only you can see where you're going. I
Yeah.
can help you, right?
Yeah.
And as you're working on this, do you do conversational intelligence? I mean, I love the work of Judith Glaser, where the brain responds with hormones differently to the word I than to we.
Mm.
If it's a we
Mm.
transformation, oxytocin says let's bond and do it. And if it's an I, you're going to, the cortisol runs around and says, get out of here. Any thoughts about the conversations and how to have them intelligently?
Fundamental. The conversation is everything about it. It's what sets the context. It's what sets the working together. And one of the things I love about personal construct theory and constructivist psychology is it's one of the few, if not only, sort of psychology where the expert is the individual, the
Mhm.
client, rather than the therapist. So if you think about lots of other psychologies, it's the Sigmund Freud from that. It's the person sitting behind that's interpreting your thoughts. Whereas within constructivist psychology, you work with the individual to help you understand their processes, their thoughts, and their definitions that then help them map their territory. And we all know the map isn't the territory, but it gives you that guideline and it gives you that example. So again, it goes back to that engagement and involvement. It's a co-created joint discussion that helps you explore. I'll move that way. Helps you explore really the size and the scope of the impact that it is on people as we're going down this
Yes.
curve. The bigger it gets, the more they internalize it till if we get to the bottom of it, we've got down there confusion and um, that I don't know what to do. All my past experiences aren't helping me. I can't I can't use the things I've done in the past because they're no longer working. And then that's where we come off this and we go round potentially down to that hostility about trying to force the issue and not change with a lot of energy, a lot of activity.
Mm.
Or we start working and thinking about, I can make this work. What's options? How can I make a different choice? Where can I go differently? Now, I've added one on here as well that
Yes.
I'll
Well,
move right out of the way for that. The
this,
one that just comes off now that goes up to the I'm off.
right.
And that's where I'm not prepared to compromise my values to stay. That's where maybe the organization's toxic. And it's that it's that no, I'm better than this. I trust myself. I know I am a good person. I'm being forced into a situation I don't like. And a couple of times, a couple of organizations I've been in, that's happened to me. And I'm sure with your wide experiences, you've had similar issues. One organization I was in, we were encouraged to learn from mistakes, encouraged to go out on a limb and try things and then learn whether it worked or not. That was all a learning. To then get the finance director sending an email out saying, I'm sick and tired of people doing this. The next person who does this will be named and shamed, unquote.
A little bit awful.
So, so it was, I'm off, I'm going. And part of the thing I do in the workshops or in the one-to-ones with people is to get them to visualize success, get them to look at what they can do to make it work and to turn round and look to the future and then use a bit of scenario planning or what if type of exercises to get them either creating an identity for themselves that works in that place based on other people who've been there, or to create their own route maps to how do they get to wherever they've seen as their end goal.
A couple of things, and then we're about ready to wrap up, though. One of which is that the mind remembers what you celebrate.
Mm,
And if you don't celebrate, people's minds will simply delete what you've just asked them to do or change or whatever. So
Yep.
your finance guy story, I think we've all had one of those. They just don't
Mm.
hear. How do you want them? You know, we're doing a program on feedback, feed forward, and what is it you want someone to do by telling them through feedback what's working and what's not?
Ah,
And if you don't
yeah,
really help them do it differently, then all you've done is spend time berating them on the past and not giving them any guidelines on how to be better tomorrow. It's about a feed forward, not a feed backwards.
totally,
Right?
totally.
It's
Um,
yeah, yeah, please.
Model like, sorry, Andy. Yeah, so excited about that because I totally agree. And the sandwich doesn't work and has been proved not to work. But I came across a model 5 or 6 years ago now that looks at what worked really well, what did you do well, what could you do even better,
Yes,
and it's for me a stunning feedback model that I get at the start of every training session where I'm doing a series of them with the same people. I get them to tell me what's their biggest success, what are they most proud of since our last session, and with hindsight, what would they now do differently?
yeah,
So the start of every session, and I use it a lot in one-to-one coaching, is them giving themselves feedback on
yes,
their performance, what they've done. And for me, that's the most effective feedback
yeah.
and the healthiest feedback model I've come across. Um, One organisation I did some work into called it the plus even better if model. What are all the pluses? What are the things that would be even better if you did something different? And it takes the negativity out of
Conversational.
takes the negativity out of the conversation. Yeah.
And then somehow maybe we've been raised with the negative being a punishment for doing
Mm,
something, and we almost have to retrain all our parents on how to praise in order
mm,
to build, because kids are no different than adults in this, and you're
totally.
setting them up for pain as opposed to growth, learning, pleasure. You and I could talk a lot for a long time. I'm already thinking about who I want to send your podcast to listen. We shall do a follow-up to this, but for the moment, share with our listeners a couple of things you don't want them to forget, actually to do. I love your feed forward, the positive, but
Yeah.
a couple of things that you've learned, your culture curve has done that they should walk away with and say, I can do that. Thoughts?
Yeah. And I think one of them is the feed forward. It's using the model of what worked and what would you do differently rather than being threatening. It's about making change personal.
Hmm.
So what will they get out of it? Engaging them within that change and helping them move through that change process. And I suppose one of my key thoughts is organizations don't change, people do.
Do.
So it's putting the I into change
That's right.
rather than just cheap dipping.
And John, if people would like to reach you, I see your C2D. Tell them, where's your website? What is it called? And how can they get
Yeah,
it?
it's called C2D
Yeah.
.co.uk, and the C2D is coaching, counselling, and development. So because I'm really creative, it's CCD is what I do: coach, counsel, and develop in there. So it's just floating around in the ether. Anybody likes the curve here, they can download copies of it. This curve for your audience is brand new, and it's just been changed on the website at the moment. The previous incarnation is still there, but there's also a talk a bit more about my favorite resistance to change model, um, which looks at the pros and cons of changing and the pros and cons of not changing, and other things. The 4-box model I talked about, a bit of work on my master's dissertation, etc. So
I,
C2D.
C2D. I think that John has to come back in 6 months and we have to talk about how to adapt to the fast pace of change today, because everybody is really struggling with the great transformation. The pandemic
Mm,
So I used to say to clients, don't hire me unless you have a crisis or you create one. Because
Yeah.
once you're at a point where you're going to listen, this will be very difficult for your folks to begin to appreciate, why are we giving up what's working okay? It's not working okay. And, the book that this podcast was based on the Brink, has 8 client stories about clients that got stuck or stalled because they couldn't see what was right before them. And a little anthropology helped them do that, which is what
Definitely.
but it's a little like what you do. We help them see what's right there, that their minds are deleting or, obfuscating because they can't quite make it work. Let me wrap up. For my listeners, thank you for coming today.
Thank
And
you for having me.
I know it's so much fun. Isn't it fun to share? When we started, John said, I just love to share. And I said, me too. It's more fun than anything else. What I'd like to tell our listeners, though, is that we are anthropologists. Not everybody knows what that means or how to help a business. And so, I keep pushing a little bit about how do I help you see, feel, and think in new ways so that you too can adapt to these fast changing times. I don't think we're going to go back. And whether it's hybrid or it's a new technologies, a global workforce, everything is under a siege on change. And as John and I can tell you, I did my dissertation on punch cards. They don't exist anymore. I can tell you my list of all the things that have changed in our lifetime. The speed is just accelerating. So join the fun, make change your friend, and let us help you, because both John and I like to jump right in and help you see things through a fresh lens so you can adapt to fast changing times. The past isn't coming back. The future, you can visualize it, but it's never particularly certain. My books are all on Amazon. Our new book, Women Mean Business, over 500 extraordinary insights from extraordinary women to help spark your success, is doing extremely well. And we've had over 50 events helping women see themselves through a fresh lens. There are 102 women in the book who share 5 wisdoms each. That's 500 wisdoms. And the one that I love the most is, as I rise, I lift others with me. And that is really what women are trying to do. My second book, Rethink Smashing the Myths of Women in Business, is about 11 of our cases of our folks who we interviewed, lots and lots and lots of interviews to find 5 to share with you of women who smash the myths of women in business. And so there's a theme here. We like to help you change. Change is painful, but we can help you do it in a way that makes change your friend, and that friend is somebody you want to spend a lot of time with. They want to come back after their first counseling and see, now, how do I change, right? So, John, thanks again. I'll see you in 6 months. We'll redo this and keep the story going. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great day. Please turn your observations into innovations and be a little anthropologist. Bye-bye now.